Nestled deep within Lookout Mountain near Fort Payne, Alabama, Manitou Cave holds stories from our Cherokee ancestors. We had the distinct honor of traveling deep into the cave as researchers continue to try and decipher the historic Cherokee syllabary within.
In traditional Cherokee cosmology, there are three planes of existence. First, the world above, a domain of pure tranquility. Suspended below that is the land that you and I inhabit, a world constantly in flux, struggling for a balance between the peace found above and the unease that comes from the world beneath us. Cherokee people's ancestral homelands in southern Appalachia are host to a vast network of underground tunnels and aquifers. Some Cherokees believe the natural springs and caves that cover the landscape serve as portals to the world below, a home to powerful entities, a place Cherokees would not likely venture into without purpose.
We are in a place called Manitou Cave. It's about 1.5 miles, 2 miles from Fort Payne, Alabama.
Bo Carroll is a tribal citizen and lead archaeologist for the Eastern Band of the Cherokee Indians Tribal Historic Preservation Office. Bo's work in Manitou Cave has provided essential context for one of the most pivotal moments in Cherokee history, the implementation of Sequoyah's writing system, the Cherokee syllabary. Manitou Cave is near present-day Fort Payne, Alabama, formerly known as Willstown.
Willstown becomes this intellectual center, so to speak. Sequoyah relocates there, for instance, and we know that he's kind of been working on the syllabary for a period of time. First thing Sequoyah does when he invents the syllabary or finally has a working system is he gives it away. He gives it to Cherokee people, and including his children.
Through his research, Bo believes that one of Sequoyah's children was a frequent visitor to the cave.
I had a feeling that they said Richard Guess. Found a document, it's an old removal record. It had a signature. So I matched it with this and it looks exactly the same. Yeah. And then I looked in the roll books and at Sequoyah's children, and he had a son named Richard. So I had a pretty good idea that's who that was that wrote that. Richard Guess. Signed his English name. People just wanted to write because they knew how, and they were writing in their own language.
Nearly 2 centuries later, Cherokee historians can only speculate on the meaning behind some of the messages left within the cave.
Even though we can maybe translate what's there, it doesn't necessarily mean that we're reading in the ways that our ancestors would have.
It's wrote backwards again, like if you were holding it up to a mirror, which I found interesting. They had a reason to be writing that up there. So, it's probably 10 foot, 11 foot from that ledge to the ceiling. And you'd have to stand on the edge of it and reach out over this.
Even today, this cave holds significant meaning for both our ancestors who wrote on the walls and for the Cherokee academics working to decipher its meaning.
So going into a caves was both something that Cherokee people did, but also something Cherokee people took seriously because it's also a doorway, a gateway to other realms. And so it wasn't necessarily that caves were bad, it was just that caves were powerful spaces. And so you need to tread lightly and think deeply about your engagement with powerful spaces and powerful beings.
The adoption of the syllabary was not the only cultural shift happening in Willstown in the 1820s.
We also have to be very practical, I think, in our thinking about why caves, right? That there are lots of pressures on Cherokee people to civilize during this moment.
Part of the civilization policy was to be a good Christian and give up everything that made you a traditional Cherokee. So you have these missionaries, churches moving in. They looked at anything related to traditional Cherokee practices as the devil's work or heathenish. Think it drove a lot of stuff underground that might not normally have to be hidden.
They're not only continuing a long tradition, continuing what they've always done, continuing to carry out the ceremonies, but also doing it in close proximity to missionaries, right in their backyards, so to speak. And there's a resistance there.
In the deepest reaches of the cave, there is an open cavern, ideal for ceremonies associated with the game of stickball.
Ani Yanli, leaders are the ones who lead. Ti Kwa Na Itzo. Ti Kwa Na Itzo is an older term for stickball. The stickball team, Guo Na Kanlan, that's one of the ones that had trouble translating.
The writing, translated into English, becomes the ones who lead the stickball team in their month, April, the 30th day, 1828.
1828. You go through the ceremonies that you have to go through. Water's involved. So I think they would take them to the water down there, and then they'd come up here and wrote about the stickball game they're getting ready to play. They played it to practice. It's good for hand-to-hand combat practice. Comparable to actual war, not a lot of people died.
And at the same time, it had a ceremonial side. So it wasn't just some piece of entertainment.
It's essentially the same thing as you're doing before you go to war. You're preparing to take a life or have your life taken.
Elsewhere in the cave, a small etching of syllabary tells of a possible outcome to the documented stickball game. Mr. R.G., we who are those that have blood come out of their nose and mouth, I am a man of authority, Richard Guess. This etching, written in both Cherokee and English, lends credence to Bo's theory that Richard Guess was one of Sequoyah's children.
The language itself, that we had our noses bloodied, right? That there's also a need when stickball games to get carried out, that anytime blood is spilled, ceremonies have to be conducted in order to make sure that balance is restored. Blood, much like caves, is a powerful substance.
These long-standing ideals were not cast aside. They were held close to the heart, even while being plunged into darkness.
And here's this cave with syllabary, which is new, which is a change. And yet what it's being used for is to do very old things, to talk about and record old ceremonies, things that connected Cherokee people to the past, but using a technology that's going to move Cherokee people to the future.
They're trying to hold on to what makes them Cherokee. And they were successful as far as I'm concerned, because we can still come in here and read this. I can still hear people talking Cherokee. I can still go to a ceremony. That culture's still alive.